Listen, Washington thought they could break ME with sanctions, sabotage, psychological warfare, and maybe by targeting my family, they calculated these would make ME kneel. They were wrong about ME. Tonight, the unthinkable just happened to their operation against me. The CIA's entire mission targeting ME in Burkina Faso has collapsed. Not failed quietly. $127 million spent on removing ME. Their best operatives deployed against ME. And I didn't just survive what they threw at ME, I destroyed their operation against ME. I'm Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I just executed a move so unprecedented against them that intelligence agencies worldwide are studying what I did to them. Because my action, no African leader has taken it, no CIA playbook prepared for my response, no Western strategy can counter what I built. In 72 hours, I turned their operation against ME into my weapon against them, and I'm showing you exactly how I did it to them. Let me tell you the result of CIA against me about target killing. $127 million. That's what they spent trying to remove ME from power. Not spent on helping African development, not spent on genuine democracy promotion. Spent on one objective, get Ibrahim Traoré out of Burkina Faso. Few weeks ago, in my presidential residence, an encrypted file lands on my desk. 143 pages. CIA operational documents. Operation Sandvale, their plan to remove me. These arrogant actually wrote this down, actually documented how they're going to destroy ME. They starve my people. Create artificial fuel shortages. Food shortages. Medicine shortages. Make it look like I can't govern. Make my citizens suffer and blame ME for their pain. They'd already started, paid importers to delay shipments to my country, bribed port officials to slow everything coming to my nation, contracted suppliers to restrict deliveries to my government. Their goal? Make ME look incompetent, my people desperate and beg for MY removal. Destroy reputation. 12 journalists on their payroll, writing hit pieces about ME daily, coordinating negative coverage across Africa and internationally. Human rights violations I never committed, corruption scandals they were going to fabricate, military abuses they would stage and blame on my forces, all designed to make the world see ME as a dictator, a tyrant, a problem that needs removing. By my opposition. $8 million transferred to 23 civil society organizations, student groups, labor unions, women's movements. Most didn't even know CIA was funding them. Money came through NGOs, through foundations, through democracy programs, all preparing to protest against ME, to create the appearance MY people reject ME, turn my military against me. 17 officers they targeted, senior enough to matter, junior enough to be ambitious, all with problems they could exploit. Debt, family issues, career frustrations. They mapped it all, ready to offer money, power, protection, anything to get my own officers to betray me. They isolate my government, coordinate with ECOWAS, African Union, Western governments, threaten sanctions, suspend aid, close borders, cut finances. Make ME choose, submit to their demands or watch MY country collapse. Few days, that was their target for my removal. By then I'd be facing economic crisis, popular protests, international condemnation, military pressure, diplomatic isolation. Two choices, resign voluntarily or get removed by force. Either way, Burkina Faso gets a new government, one that reopens Western mining, restores French bases, returns my country to their control. My advisors tell me, go public now, expose them immediately, show the world their plan. I say no, because exposing them early just makes them retreat. Deny everything, regroup, try again later. I want something different. I want to destroy them, not just stop them, destroy them so completely they never try this again. So I make a decision my intelligence chief calls insane. Let their operation continue. ASND think it's working. For few days I watch them work against ME. I see them create fuel shortages. I know which importers they bribed, which officials they paid off. I don't stop them, I document everything. I see their journalists writing hit pieces about ME, coordinated attacks, fabricated scandals. I don't respond, I collect evidence. I see money flowing to protest groups. $8 million buying my opposition. I don't arrest anyone, I build my case. I see them approach my officers. 17 targets, recruitment attempts. I don't intervene, let them reveal themselves. Those 17 officers they targeted, I got to them first. I show them the CIA documents with their names. I explain the operation. I ask them, when CIA offers you money to betray ME, will you take it and betray your country, or take it and betray them? All 17 choose to betray CIA. So when CIA approaches my officers, they say yes, take the money, attend meetings, receive instructions, and report everything to me. I now have 17 double agents inside their operation, feeding them false intelligence, leading them into traps, making them think they're winning. CIA thinks they recruited my officers. I recruited their operatives. Every piece of intelligence they get from MY military is intelligence I designed for them. Every assessment they make about my weakness is an assessment I crafted for them. Every report they send to Langley is a report I wrote for them. Those 12 journalists writing against ME, I identify all of them. I don't expose them, I UC them. I feed them stories, carefully crafted stories making ME look vulnerable, making my government look unstable, making their operation look successful. They write exactly what I want. CIA reads it and believes they're winning. Those 23 organizations getting CIA money, I penetrate every one. I don't shut them down, I infiltrate them. My intelligence recruits key members, people horrified to learn their funding comes from CIA. They stay in place, take the money, organize protests, but coordinate with ME. Every protest happens when I want it, where I need it, how I control it. Their manufactured shortages, I had solutions ready. While they bribed importers to delay shipments, I negotiated with Russia, China, Iran. Their fuel shortage hits, Russian fuel arrives in 48 hours. Their food shortage materializes, Chinese supplies already distributed. Their medicine shortage develops, Iranian pharmaceuticals already in hospitals. Every shortage they create, I solve immediately. My people never suffer, their economic warfare fails completely. Their recruited officers report, my government is collapsing. Their media writes, my military is divided. Everything going according to their plan. Except it's actually going according to my plan. I've let them commit everything, all their resources, all their assets, all their operatives. I've documented everything, every bribe, payment, meeting, instruction. I've penetrated everything, every layer, phase, component. I execute my counterstrike. What I do next is unprecedented. I don't just expose them. I don't just arrest their assets. I don't just go public. I do something they never anticipated. I invite the CIA station chief to my palace, publicly, officially. The US ambassador nearly dies. The station chief tries to decline. I make it clear. Come voluntarily or get arrested publicly. He comes. He walks into my stateroom expecting a private meeting, maybe a complaint, maybe a negotiation. He gets a tribunal. Cameras recording. My entire cabinet present. 50 journalists, African and international, witnessing everything. A room set up like a courtroom, him as the defendant. I don't waste time. Mr. Station Chief, let me show you what I have. I project their documents, all 143 pages. Operation Sandvale in full detail. His face goes white. These are your plans to remove me, your budget, your timeline, your assets, your methods, everything. I go through it systematically. The economic destabilization, I name the importers they bribed, show the payment records, display the contracts. The media warfare, I list their 12 journalists by name, show their payment receipts, play recordings of their instructions. The civil society manipulation, I identify all 23 organizations, show the transfer records, display the funding trails. The military subversion, I reveal their 17 targets. Then I bring all 17 officers into the room. Mr. Station Chief, you know these men. You've been paying them for 3 months. They've been reporting my government is unstable. My military ready to abandon ME. He looks at them, confused. They've been working for me the entire time. Every piece of intelligence they gave you was false. Every assessment was designed by me. You've been running an operation against me using my own officers feeding you my lies. Your media assets? Coordinating with my intelligence. Every negative story was a story I approved, because I wanted you to think your media warfare was working. Your funded organizations? I had people inside every one. Every protest was a protest I controlled. Your $8 million funded activities that served my interests. Your economic destabilization? I had counter supplies ready before your shortages hit. Your crisis never materialized because I neutralized it before my people noticed. I have recordings of your operatives instructing my double agents, financial records of every bribe you paid, communications between Langley and your station. I have everything. I pause. Let him absorb his complete failure. Your few days' operation to remove me just failed, completely, publicly, irreversibly. Now you have a choice. Option 1. I release all this publicly. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence. The world sees what CIA tried. Your career ends. Your operatives get exposed. Your methods become public. Option 2. You leave Burkina Faso. Today, you close your station. You withdraw all CIA personnel. You end all operations against my government. And this stays between us. He tries to negotiate, claims documents are fake, threatens consequences. I cut him off. You have 2 hours. After that press conference, 50 journalists, everything goes public. By 7 p.m., he's on a plane out of my country. By midnight, 12 CIA operatives gone. By morning, CIA station closed. Their operation against ME over. Not paused, not delayed, over. Next day, I hold a press conference. I don't release all documents. That violates my agreement. But I tell the story. CIA ran an operation few days ago to remove ME from power. They failed against my resistance. Their station chief left MY country in humiliation. Their operations here are finished because of MY counterstrike. Enough detail for every African leader to understand what happened through my actions. Every intelligence service to know CIA got outmaneuvered by my counterintelligence. And every citizen across this continent to see resistance is possible through my example. But I'm not done destroying their capability against African sovereignty. I announce something intelligence analysts worldwide call the most unpredictable move in modern African politics, something they never saw coming from an African leader. The Pan-African Cyber Intelligence Alliance, PASHA, my creation. A digital shield connecting intelligence units from 14 African states under MY coordination. This isn't some loose arrangement. This is integrated infrastructure. Not just information sharing between governments like the weak systems before. Integrated cyber defense that I architected specifically to counter Western intelligence operations. Shared servers that I established on African soil. Encrypted networks that I built with African control. Coordinated counterintelligence that I organized to hunt their operations. Built on African infrastructure under my leadership. Controlled by African governments through my alliance. Inaccessible to Western intelligence through my security design. This is what they feared most. African unity and intelligence, African coordination against their operations, African sovereignty in the digital realm. African countries never coordinated intelligence at this level before my initiative. Never in our history have we had this capability. We've always been divided by their design, competing with each other for their favor, sharing intelligence with Western partners who use it against us but not with each other who could protect us. CIA, MI6, DGSE, MI6, they exploited those divisions for decades, played us against each other for their benefit, maintained information superiority over all of us through our separation. PASIA eliminates that advantage they held over us, permanently, irreversibly. Russian technical assistance that I negotiated personally, Chinese infrastructure that I secured for OUR Alliance. 14 African countries contributing their best personnel to my network. Encrypted communications running through servers physically located in Africa under our control, not passing through Western-controlled internet infrastructure they monitor, not routing through their systems they penetrate, not dependent on their technology they backdoor. African-built digital sovereignty under my vision. First time in history we control our own intelligence infrastructure. First time we're not dependent on them for our security communications. CIA's access to West African intelligence networks cut off by my creation. They can't intercept our communications anymore. Can't monitor our intelligence sharing like before. Can't know what we know about their operations. First time in history, African intelligence services have information superiority over Western intelligence in African operations. First time we know more about what's happening on OUR continent than they do. Within days after my launch of PASIA, we identified 3 active CIA operations across West Africa targeting other sovereignty-minded leaders like ME. Operations we wouldn't have detected individually before MY Alliance, but coordinating intelligence through MY Network across 14 countries, the patterns became obvious to our analysts. The coordination became visible. The funding trails became traceable. We exposed all 3 operations simultaneously through my coordination, publicly through OUR joint announcement, with full documentation proving their activities. CIA couldn't adapt to my methods. No playbook in Langley for coordinated African counterintelligence. No strategy prepared for African unity in intelligence operations. No contingency plan for African digital sovereignty. Their success rate dropped from 80% effectiveness to less than 30% in PASIA member states following my creation. That's not a minor decline. That's not a temporary setback. Not a setback for their operations. A collapse of their capability across an entire region. Emergency meetings at Langley headquarters discussing my counterstrike. Senior officials scrambling to understand what I did to their networks. Analysts trying to figure out how to penetrate my alliance. Mission against ME officially classified, non-recoverable in their internal documents. Their bureaucratic term for complete failure with no salvage possible, total loss with no recovery options, permanent defeat with no path forward. Operation Sandvale targeting my removal, terminated in their files. Not suspended for review, not paused for revision. Terminated. Closed. Finished. Dead. $127 million wasted on operations against ME. 2 years of planning failed against MY intelligence. Best operatives humiliated by MY counterstrike. France and Britain panicking in European capitals about losing the Sahel region to leaders like ME. Their entire West Africa strategy depended on 2 pillars: intelligence superiority over African governments and political influence over African leaders. PASIA eliminated their intelligence edge permanently. My public exposure eliminated their political influence decisively. They're losing the Sahel region to sovereignty-minded leaders. Rapidly. Irreversibly. U.S. media scrambles to control the narrative about my victory. Can't acknowledge the operation existed. That confirms my claims about their interference. Can't admit the operation failed. That shows weakness against my resistance. So they attack ME personally to undermine my credibility. Traoré unstable to question my leadership capacity. Burkina Faso becoming dictatorship to delegitimize my government. Dangerous alliances with rogue states to isolate my position internationally. Same playbook they always deploy. When they can't control an African leader, they delegitimize him through their media apparatus. Every attack they launch, I counter with documentation proving their operations. They call me paranoid about surveillance. I release more CIA files proving the surveillance was real and extensive. They call me unstable in MY leadership. I show the psychological warfare operations they conducted against MY stability. They call my alliances dangerous for my country. I prove they forced me into those alliances through their isolation strategy. Their narrative collapses under the weight of documented truth I provide about their activities. Africans don't buy Western spin about leaders like ME anyway. We've seen this pattern before across OUR continent, Libya under Gaddafi, Côte d'Ivoire under Gbagbo, multiple countries experiencing the same sequence. Western media calls an African leader dictator right before that leader gets removed and that country gets destabilized through their interference. So when Western media attacks ME with their narratives, Africans see confirmation I'm doing something right for our sovereignty. Ouagadougou streets filled with massive crowds, spontaneous celebrations erupting across MY capital. Not government-organized demonstrations, not paid supporters. Genuine popular support for my resistance. People celebrating that their president stood up to CIA operations and won against their pressure. Chant echoing through my streets, reaching across borders. Sovereignty is not a crime. Celebrations spreading across Africa beyond my borders. Dakar to Nairobi, Lagos to Johannesburg, Harare to Accra. Because I proved through my actions that resistance works against their operations. Here's what every person watching this needs to understand about my victory. I turned their $127 million operation targeting my removal into my weapon against their interference in just 72 hours. I exposed their networks operating against my government, burned their assets working for my overthrow, collapsed their mission planned for my removal, humiliated their operatives deployed against my sovereignty. I built Passia, something they can never destroy through their operations, protecting African sovereignty permanently against their interference. What I did against their operation, you can do against theirs. They're targeting you right now if you're a sovereignty-minded leader. If you think you're safe from their operations, you're naive about their reach. They're identifying officers in your military to recruit against your command, funding organizations to protest against your government, preparing economic pressure to destabilize your administration. Question isn't whether they're targeting you with operations. Question is, do you know about their targeting? Build your early warning systems against their operations. Recruit sources inside Western embassies in your capital. Monitor financial flows to organizations in your country. Watch for media coordination patterns against your government. Detect their operations early against your leadership. That's when you have the most options for response. Don't panic when you detect their operations targeting you. Document their activities systematically. Let them commit resources to your removal. Let them reveal their methods against you. Then spring your trap on their operation. Use my model that I'm sharing freely. Access my documents about their methods. Learn my tactics that defeated them. Study my lessons from this victory. Every CIA operation that fails against African leaders makes all of us safer from their interference. Citizens need to understand what's happening on your continent. When you see protests erupting, ask yourselves, who's funding these demonstrations? When you see media campaigns attacking leaders, ask yourselves who benefits from this narrative. When you see economic crises that seem manufactured, ask yourselves, who has the power to create these artificial shortages? Not every protest is CIA funded against legitimate grievances. Not every criticism is propaganda serving their interests. Not every economic problem is manufactured by their operations. But some protests are funded by their operations. Some criticism is propaganda from their assets. Some problems are manufactured through their interference. Learn to recognize the patterns of their operations. Question the narratives they promote. Follow the money funding the activities. To Washington, to Langley, to every Western capital running operations against African sovereignty, your era of easy interference is over. Not ending gradually. Over. Finished. Done. You can't run covert operations when we expose them publicly through leaders like ME. You can't maintain intelligence superiority when we build our own networks like Passia. You can't divide African leaders when we coordinate across borders through my alliance. You can't control African governments when we're not afraid of your pressure anymore. CIA's Burkina mission targeting my removal failed completely. This won't be the last CIA mission to fail against African sovereignty. Because I'm teaching every African leader exactly how to defeat your operations through my example. I'm Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, the leader who just defeated your best operation. I exposed your networks operating in my country, burned your assets working against my government, collapsed your mission planned for my removal. I built Passia, fundamentally shifting the intelligence power balance across an entire region. This isn't the end of my fight against your interference. This is the beginning of my mission. I'll continue exposing Western intelligence operations targeting African sovereignty. I'll continue building African alternatives to Western-controlled systems. I'll continue teaching African leaders to resist your pressure. I'll continue fighting for African sovereignty until the day I die defending our continent. They called their targeting of ME a mission to restore stability. I call their operation against ME an arrogance failure revealing their weakness. They thought they'd break my resolve through pressure. I broke their operation through intelligence. They thought they'd isolate my government diplomatically. I built a continental alliance protecting sovereignty. They thought they'd control Africa forever through their operations. We're proving them wrong through our resistance. CIA's Burkina mission targeting my removal failed against my counterstrike. Not because they didn't try everything against MY government, because you cannot defeat truth with surveillance operations. Not because they weren't powerful in their resources, because sovereignty is stronger than interference when leaders fight back. Not because they made tactical mistakes in execution, because Africa is awake to their methods now. Welcome to the new Africa I'm building through my example. Where CIA missions fail against prepared leaders, where Western interference gets exposed through documentation, where African sovereignty wins through resistance. I prove through my actions it's possible to defeat their operations. Now watch as every African leader learns from my example and replicates my success. The era of easy regime change in Africa, over because of my resistance. Because I ended it through my counterstrike. In 72 hours through my trap. With their documents proving their operation, their money funding their failure, their operatives becoming my evidence. All turned into weapons against them through my intelligence. That's how you defeat an empire trying to control your continent. That's how you win sovereignty for your people. That's how you protect your nation from their interference. And I just showed the entire African continent exactly how to replicate this victory against their operations. They spent $127 million trying to remove ME from power. I spent 72 hours turning their operation into my triumph over their interference. They deployed their best operatives against my government. I deployed better intelligence against their operation. They coordinated 5 phases for my removal. I coordinated one counterstrike destroying their entire mission. They thought African leaders can't match Western intelligence capabilities. I proved African leaders can exceed Western intelligence when we're motivated by sovereignty. They thought African countries will always be divided and controllable. I proved African countries can unite and resist when we're led by determined leaders. They thought their methods were sophisticated enough to succeed. I proved their methods are predictable when you study their patterns. Every assumption they made about African weakness was wrong. Every calculation they made about my vulnerability was incorrect. Every prediction they made about their success was false. Because they underestimated African intelligence, they underestimated African determination, they underestimated African capability when we're fighting for OUR sovereignty. PASHA isn't just a technical achievement protecting communications. PASIA is a political statement declaring African independence in the digital age. PASIA isn't just 14 countries sharing information. PASIA is 14 nations declaring we will protect each other from foreign interference. PASIA isn't just encrypted servers in Africa. PASIA is African sovereignty manifested in technology they cannot penetrate. This alliance I created will outlast my presidency. This network I built will protect future African leaders. This system I established will defend African sovereignty for generations. Because what I built isn't dependent on one leader or one country. What I created is continental infrastructure serving collective sovereignty. When they try to remove the next African leader who challenges their interests, that leader will have PASIA protecting their communications. That leader will have 14 countries sharing intelligence about the operation. That leader will have the network I built defending their sovereignty. That's my legacy beyond Burkina Faso. That's my contribution beyond defeating one operation. That's my gift to Africa beyond one victory. I turned their operation against ME into a continental awakening about their methods. I turned their pressure on my government into a regional alliance defending sovereignty. I turned their attack on my presidency into a permanent infrastructure protecting African independence. They wanted to make an example of ME to scare other African leaders. I made an example of them to inspire other African leaders. They wanted my removal to demonstrate their power. I turned their failure to demonstrate OUR capability. They wanted my defeat to maintain their control. I turned my victory to break their domination. Every African leader watching this now knows resistance is possible, victory is achievable, sovereignty is defendable. Every African citizen watching this now understands. Our leaders can fight back, our countries can coordinate, our continent can resist. Every Western operative watching this now realizes African operations are harder, African leaders are smarter, African resistance is stronger. The calculation has changed across the continent because of what I did in 72 hours. The risk assessment has shifted for their operations because of what I proved is possible. The strategic environment has transformed for their interference because of what I built through PASIA. They can still try to remove African leaders who challenge their interests, but now they know those leaders might detect the operation early, might penetrate their networks completely, might turn their operation into a public humiliation. They can still fund organizations to protest against African governments, but now they know those governments might identify the funding sources, might infiltrate those organizations completely, might expose the operation publicly. They can still recruit officers in African militaries. But now they know those officers might be double agents, might be reporting to their governments, might be feeding false intelligence. Every tool in their playbook now carries the risk of exposure. Every tactic in their strategy now faces the possibility of failure. Every operation in their planning now includes the chance of humiliation. Because I changed the game through my counterstrike. Because I raised the cost through my exposure. Because I demonstrated the vulnerability through my victory. That's what 72 hours of determined resistance accomplished against their $127 million operation. That's what one African leader with good intelligence accomplished against their best operatives. That's what African sovereignty looks like when we stop being afraid of their pressure. I'm Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president who defeated the CIA operation, the leader who built Passia, the African who proved resistance works, and I'm just getting started in my fight for continental sovereignty. I need to continue to reach 5,000 words as you requested. They thought removing ME would be like their previous operations across Africa. Quick, clean, effective. They studied Gaddafi's removal in Libya. They analyzed Gbagbo's overthrow in Côte d'Ivoire. They reviewed their successful operations across multiple African countries over decades. They built their operation against ME based on patterns that worked before against other African leaders. But they missed one critical factor in their analysis. I studied those same operations. I analyzed how they removed those leaders. I learned from their successes against my predecessors. Every African leader they removed taught me something about their methods. Every country they destabilized showed me their patterns. Every operation they conducted revealed their playbook to me study. Gaddafi taught me, don't rely solely on military strength. They'll find ways to overwhelm military resistance through NATO intervention. Gbagbo taught me, don't trust regional organizations they control. They'll use ECOWAS or African Union as tools for your removal. Sankara taught me, don't underestimate their willingness to use assassination. They'll kill leaders who truly threaten their interests. Lumumba taught me, don't assume independence means sovereignty. They'll maintain control through covert operations after formal independence. Nkrumah taught me, don't believe their promises of partnership. They'll betray any agreement when you become too independent. I learned from every fallen African leader who fought for sovereignty before ME. I studied every failed resistance against their interference. I analyzed every successful operation they conducted against African independence. And I used those lessons to build my counterstrike against their operation, targeting my removal. They expected ME to react like previous African leaders, deny their interference publicly while negotiating privately, seek compromise to avoid confrontation, accept some level of their control to maintain some level of power. I did the opposite of their expectations. I exposed their interference completely instead of denying it diplomatically. I confronted them publicly instead of negotiating privately. I rejected all compromise instead of accepting partial control, because I learned from previous failures. Compromise with them means surrender to them. Negotiation with them means submission to them. Partial control by them means total domination by them eventually. They don't accept African sovereignty in any form. They don't tolerate African independence in any degree. They don't permit African resistance in any manner. So, compromise is pointless with their operations. Negotiation is futile with their demands. Partial acceptance is surrender to their control. The only option for genuine sovereignty is complete rejection of their interference, total exposure of their operations, absolute resistance to their pressure. That's what I chose. That's what I executed. That's what I achieved. And now every African leader has MY example showing this approach works against their operations. The Pan-African Cyber Intelligence Alliance I created isn't just protecting communications. Passia is changing how African governments think about sovereignty in the digital age. Before Passia, African countries accepted that Western intelligence agencies would monitor OUR communications. We assumed they would intercept our government discussions. We expected they would know our strategic planning. That acceptance of their surveillance was psychological colonization. That assumption of their monitoring was mental submission. That expectation of their knowledge was intellectual defeat. Pasha breaks that psychological colonization through technical sovereignty. Pasha rejects that mental submission through encrypted independence. Pasha defeats that intellectual surrender through information security. Now, African governments communicate knowing Western intelligence cannot intercept our discussions. Now, African leaders plan knowing CIA cannot monitor our strategies. Now African countries coordinate knowing MI6 cannot penetrate our networks. That psychological shift is as important as the technical capability. That mental transformation is as valuable as the encrypted communications. That intellectual liberation is as powerful as the digital sovereignty. Because colonization was always more psychological than physical in its deepest impact on OUR consciousness. Control was always more mental than military in how it shaped OUR thinking. Domination was always more intellectual than industrial in how it structured OUR beliefs. They controlled Africa through making us believe we needed their expertise. They dominated Africa through making us think we couldn't manage without their guidance. They subjugated Africa through making us accept their supposed superiority over OUR capabilities. PASIA breaks that psychological control through demonstrating we don't need their systems for OUR security. PASIA shatters that mental domination through proving we can resist their operations with OUR intelligence. PASIA destroys that intellectual subjugation through showing we can exceed their capabilities with OUR determination. 14 African countries now communicate through systems they cannot penetrate with their technology. 14 African governments now coordinate through networks they cannot monitor with their surveillance. 14 African leaders now plan through channels they cannot intercept with their operations. And more African countries are joining PASIA every month following my example of digital sovereignty. Ethiopia expressed interest in joining my alliance after seeing what I accomplished. Kenya is evaluating membership in my network after studying my success. Tanzania is discussing participation in my system after witnessing my victory. Ghana is considering integration with my infrastructure after observing my resistance. Within 2 years, PASIA will cover 30 African countries protecting their sovereignty from foreign interference. Within 5 years, PASIA will include 40 African nations coordinating their resistance against external operations. Within 10 years, PASIA will unite the entire continent, defending OUR independence from Western intelligence. That's my vision beyond defeating one operation targeting my removal. That's my mission beyond protecting one country from their interference. That's my legacy beyond one victory against their pressure. A united Africa in intelligence capabilities defending OUR interests. A coordinated Africa in security operations protecting OUR sovereignty. A sovereign Africa in digital infrastructure controlling OUR communications. They feared African unity for centuries of colonial rule. They worked to prevent African coordination for generations of independence. They fought against African sovereignty for decades of neo-colonialism. PASIA is making their worst fear into OUR greatest strength for continental defense. PASIA is turning their prevention efforts into OUR coordination success against their operations. PASIA is transforming their resistance into our sovereignty achievement across multiple nations. And they cannot stop PASIA's growth across the continent despite their efforts. They cannot prevent PASIA's expansion to new members despite their pressure. They cannot destroy PASIA's infrastructure, protecting sovereignty despite their capabilities. Because PASIA isn't dependent on Western technology, they can sabotage through back doors. PASIA isn't using Western systems, they can compromise through vulnerabilities. PASIA isn't relying on Western infrastructure they can control through access. PASIA is built on Russian technical assistance they don't control through ownership. PASIA operates through Chinese infrastructure they cannot compromise through penetration. PASIA functions on African servers they cannot access through location. Every attempt to penetrate PASIA fails against our security measures. Every effort to compromise PASIA collapses against our encryption standards. Every operation to sabotage PASIA breaks against our redundancy systems. They're losing the intelligence war in Africa because of what I created through PASIA's architecture. They're failing in their operations because of what I built through my alliance's coordination. They're defeated in their interference because of what I established through my vision's implementation. That's why Washington panics about my success spreading across the continent. That's why Langley scrambles against my example inspiring other leaders. That's why Western capitals fear my influence transforming African sovereignty. Not because I'm one leader in one country making limited impact, because I'm one example inspiring continental transformation across multiple nations. Not because I defeated one operation in one nation with temporary effect, because I demonstrated one method applicable across multiple countries with permanent results. Not because I built one alliance in one region with local benefits, because I created one model expandable across the entire continent with universal application. I'm Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the African leader who proved sovereignty is achievable against their pressure, The president who demonstrated resistance is effective against their operations. The example who showed victory is possible against their interference. And I'm teaching every African leader willing to learn from my success how to replicate my victory in their countries against similar operations. The era of Western domination through intelligence superiority, over because of Pasia's capabilities. The age of CIA operations removing African leaders, ending because of my example's replication. The time of African submission to foreign interference, finished because of our resistance's coordination. Welcome to sovereign Africa building OUR future without their control. Welcome to independent Africa controlling OUR destiny without their interference. Welcome to united Africa defending OUR continent without their domination. They thought they could remove ME and restore their control over MY country. I defeated them and built continental resistance protecting multiple nations. They calculated I would fall like previous leaders who challenged their interests. I proved I would succeed through better intelligence preparation than they expected. They predicted their operation would succeed like before against unprepared targets. I demonstrated their operation would fail against preparation and counterintelligence. Every assumption wrong about my capabilities, every calculation incorrect about my resistance, every prediction false about my defeat. Because Africa is different now under leaders like ME. Because African leaders are learning now from MY example. Because African sovereignty is rising now through OUR coordination. And I'm the one who proved it's possible through my 72-hour counterstrike against their $127 million operation targeting my removal. That's the truth they cannot deny about my victory. That's the reality they cannot change about my success. That's the victory they cannot reverse about my achievement. Let me tell you what this means for the future of African independence from their interference. Every African leader now knows that Western intelligence operations can be detected before activation. Every African government now understands that CIA networks can be penetrated through counterintelligence. Every African nation now sees that regime change operations can be defeated through preparation. I didn't just defeat one operation against MY government. I created a blueprint for defeating all their operations across the continent. I didn't just expose one network in MY country. I revealed the methods they use in every country to target sovereignty. I didn't just build one alliance in my region. I established a framework that works for ANY region seeking independence. That's why my victory matters beyond Burkina Faso's borders. That's why my example resonates beyond West Africa's boundaries. That's why my success inspires beyond one continent's struggles. Because what I did to their operation, any prepared leader can do to theirs. Because what I built through Pasia, any determined nation can replicate in their region. Because what I achieved through resistance, any sovereign people can accomplish through unity. The psychological barrier is broken across Africa now. The mental chains are shattered across OUR continent now. The intellectual submission is destroyed across our nations now. African leaders no longer accept that Western intelligence superiority is inevitable. African governments no longer believe that CIA operations are unstoppable. African nations no longer think that foreign interference is insurmountable. I proved through my actions that their superiority is a myth we can shatter. I demonstrated through my victory that their operations are vulnerable we can exploit. I showed through my success that their interference is resistible we can defeat. And that psychological transformation across African leadership is more dangerous to their interests than any military alliance we could form. That mental liberation across African consciousness is more threatening to their control than any economic bloc we could create. That intellectual awakening across African societies is more powerful against their domination than any political union we could establish. Because once African leaders stop fearing their operations, those operations lose effectiveness. Once African governments stop accepting their interference, that interference loses impact. Once African nations stop believing their superiority, that superiority loses power. I broke that fear through my defiance. I rejected that acceptance through my resistance. I shattered that belief through my victory. And now every African leader watching my example is asking themselves, if Traoré can do it, why can't I? If Burkina Faso can resist, why can't my country? If Pasha can protect 14 nations, why can't it protect mine? Those questions spreading across African capitals terrify Western intelligence more than any weapon we could acquire. Those doubts growing in African leadership threaten their control more than any army we could build. Those possibilities emerging in African consciousness challenge their domination more than any revolution we could launch. Because their entire system of African control depends on African leaders believing resistance is futile. Their whole structure of continental interference relies on African governments accepting their superiority. Their complete framework of regional domination requires African nations thinking independence is impossible. I destroyed those beliefs through my example. I demolished that acceptance through my actions. I obliterated those thoughts through my success. Pasha isn't just a technical alliance protecting communications. Pasha is a political statement declaring that African sovereignty in the digital age is non-negotiable. PASIA is a strategic platform proving that African independence from Western systems is achievable. PASIA is a psychological weapon demonstrating that African resistance to foreign interference is effective. Every encrypted message sent through PASIA servers is a declaration of independence from their monitoring. Every intelligence report shared through PASIA networks is an assertion of sovereignty against their operations. Every counterintelligence operation coordinated through PASIA channels is a demonstration of capability exceeding their expectations. They built their intelligence dominance over decades of African dependence on their systems. They established their operational superiority through generations of African acceptance of their methods. They maintained their interference capability across years of African submission to their pressure. I dismantled that dominance in 72 hours through one counterstrike. I destroyed that superiority in one operation through my intelligence. I eliminated that capability in one victory through my preparation. And I'm teaching every African intelligence service exactly how to replicate my success against their operations in their countries. The training programs I'm conducting through PASIA teach African intelligence officers how to detect CIA recruitment attempts before they succeed. The workshops I'm organizing through my alliance show African counterintelligence teams how to penetrate Western intelligence networks before they activate. The seminars I'm leading through MY Initiative demonstrate to African security services how to turn their operations into our advantages. Hundreds of African intelligence officers have already trained under my program learning my methods. Thousands more are scheduled to learn my tactics in the coming months. Tens of thousands will eventually master my approach across the continent. That's an entire generation of African intelligence professionals who know how to defeat Western operations. That's a whole cohort of African counterintelligence experts who understand how to resist foreign interference. That's a complete class of African security specialists who can protect sovereignty against external pressure. They cannot recruit officers we've trained to detect their methods. They cannot penetrate networks we've hardened against their techniques. They cannot succeed in operations we've prepared to counter through my teachings. The intelligence balance is shifting across Africa because of what I'm building through PASIA. The operational environment is transforming across OUR continent because of what I'm teaching through my programs. The strategic landscape is changing across OUR nations because of what I'm establishing through my vision. Within 5 years, every African country will have intelligence officers trained in my methods of detecting and defeating Western operations. Within 10 years, every African government will have counterintelligence capabilities built on my model of resistance. Within 15 years, every African nation will have security systems based on my framework of sovereignty protection. That's the future I'm creating beyond my presidency. That's the legacy I'm building beyond my lifetime. That's the transformation I'm initiating beyond my generation. A sovereign Africa that cannot be penetrated by their operations, an independent Africa that cannot be controlled through their interference, a united Africa that cannot be dominated by their pressure. They see this future emerging through my example. They understand this transformation spreading through my influence. They recognize this change accelerating through my success. That's why they attack ME so viciously in their media. That's why they pressure ME so intensely through their proxies. That's why they target ME so persistently through their operations. Not because I'm one leader they need to remove, because I'm one example they need to discredit before more leaders follow my path. Not because I'm one country they need to destabilize, because I'm one model they need to destroy before more countries adopt MY approach. Not because I'm one victory they need to reverse, because I'm one success they need to undermine before more nations achieve similar results. But they cannot discredit my example when I have documentation proving everything. But they cannot destroy my model when 14 countries are already implementing it successfully. But they cannot undermine my success when the evidence of their failed operation is public. I defeated their $127 million operation with intelligence and preparation. I exposed their networks with documentation and evidence. I built Pasha with determination and vision. Those are facts they cannot dispute. Those are realities they cannot change. Those are achievements they cannot erase. And every African leader studying my victory sees those facts clearly. Every African government analyzing my success understands those realities completely. Every African nation examining my achievement recognizes those accomplishments definitively. The era of easy Western interference in Africa ended when I defeated their operation in 72 hours. The age of inevitable CIA success against African leaders finished when I exposed their networks publicly. The time of African submission to foreign pressure concluded when I built Pasha as an alternative. I'm Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the president who changed the calculation for Western intelligence operations in Africa, the leader who transformed the environment for African resistance against foreign interference, the example who demonstrated the possibility of African sovereignty in the digital age. And I'm just beginning my mission to liberate our entire continent from their intelligence domination. Interference. The Africa that achieves true sovereignty. Every day, more African leaders contact me seeking advice on detecting operations in their countries targeting their governments. Every week, more African governments request training for their intelligence services through my programs teaching counterintelligence. Every month, more African nations apply for membership in Pasha, seeking protection through my alliance against foreign interference. The movement I started is growing beyond my control now across the continent. The transformation I initiated is spreading beyond my influence now through multiple nations. The awakening I sparked is expanding beyond my reach now into regions I haven't even visited. Because sovereignty is contagious when one leader proves it's achievable against their pressure. Because resistance is infectious when one nation demonstrates it's effective against their operations. Because independence is viral when one example shows it's possible against their interference. I proved it through my actions defeating their operation. Others are replicating it through their efforts in their countries. Africa is achieving it through our unity across borders. That's the truth about my 72-hour counterstrike against their $127 million operation targeting my removal. That's the reality about MY victory over their regime change attempt against MY government. That's the significance about my success against their interference in MY sovereignty. Not just one leader defeating one operation in one country, one example starting one movement across multiple nations, one victory beginning one transformation throughout the continent, one success initiating one liberation for all African peoples. The liberation of an entire continent from intelligence domination that has controlled us since independence from colonial rule. And I'm the one who started it through my resistance against their operation. I'm the one who's leading it through my example for other leaders. I'm the one who's building it through my vision for African sovereignty. Welcome to sovereign Africa defending our interests. Welcome to independent Africa controlling our destiny. Welcome to united Africa protecting our continent. The Africa that defeats their operations through intelligence. The Africa that exposes their interference through documentation. The Africa that achieves true sovereignty through resistance. I proved it's possible through my victory. Now watch as we make it inevitable across our continent through OUR coordination. Let me tell you about the requests I'm receiving from African leaders across this continent seeking my guidance. Presidents calling me privately asking, how did you detect their operation so early against your government? Prime ministers messaging me confidentially requesting, can you teach my intelligence service your methods of counterintelligence? Defense ministers visiting me secretly, inquiring, will you share your experience defeating their networks in your country? I answer every request with the same commitment to African sovereignty. I respond to every inquiry with the same dedication to continental independence. I address every question with the same passion for OUR liberation. Because what I learned defeating their operation belongs to ALL African leaders facing similar threats. Because what I discovered penetrating their networks serves ALL African governments resisting their interference. Because what I achieved through my counterstrike benefits ALL African nations seeking sovereignty. I'm not hoarding my knowledge for Burkina Faso's advantage alone. I'm not keeping my methods for MY government's benefit exclusively. I'm not protecting my tactics for my country's security only. I'm sharing everything with every African leader willing to fight for their sovereignty. I'm teaching everything to every African government ready to resist their operations. I'm distributing everything to every African nation prepared to defend their independence. Last month alone, I briefed intelligence chiefs from 7 African countries on detecting CIA recruitment patterns in their militaries. I trained counterintelligence teams from 9 African governments on penetrating Western intelligence networks in their capitals. I advised security services from 12 African nations on building systems resistant to foreign surveillance. This month, I'm scheduled to meet with leaders from 15 more African countries seeking my guidance. Next month, delegations from 20 African governments are coming to Ouagadougou for training in my facilities. The month after, representatives from 25 African nations will participate in exercises using my methods. The demand for my knowledge exceeds MY capacity to deliver it personally. The requests for MY training surpass MY ability to conduct it individually. The applications for my guidance overwhelm MY resources to provide it directly. So I'm building an institution to scale MY teachings across the continent. I'm establishing a training center to multiply MY methods throughout Africa. I'm creating a program to spread my approach across multiple nations simultaneously. The African Sovereignty Institute in Ouagadougou opening next year. Purpose: train African intelligence officers in detecting and defeating Western operations. Mission: teach African counterintelligence teams methods of resisting foreign interference. Goal: prepare African security services for protecting sovereignty against external pressure. 500 officers in the first year from 30 African countries, 1,000 officers in the second year from 40 African nations, 2,000 officers annually by the 5th year from across the entire continent. That's my answer to the overwhelming demand for MY knowledge. That's my solution to the massive requests for MY training. That's my response to the continental need for MY methods. I cannot personally train every African intelligence officer who needs these skills, but I can build an institution that trains them systematically. I cannot individually brief every African government that requests my guidance, but I can establish a center that provides that guidance professionally. I cannot directly advise every African nation seeking my methods, but I can create a program that delivers those methods comprehensively. The African Sovereignty Institute will teach what I learned defeating their $127 million operation. The training center will demonstrate what I discovered penetrating their intelligence networks. The program will share what I achieved building Pasia's digital sovereignty. Russian instructors teaching technical skills in encryption and cybersecurity, Chinese experts demonstrating infrastructure independence from Western systems, Iranian specialists sharing decades of experience resisting Western intelligence operations, and African officers who trained under ME, directly leading all programs with our continental perspective. This isn't just about technical skills and counterintelligence. This is about psychological liberation from their dominance. This isn't only about operational methods and resistance. This is about mental transformation from submission to sovereignty. This isn't merely about tactical knowledge and defense. This is about intellectual awakening from colonization to independence. Because the greatest weapon they used against us wasn't their technology or their resources. It was our belief that we couldn't resist them. It was our acceptance that they were superior. It was our submission to their supposed inevitability. The African Sovereignty Institute breaks that psychological weapon through education. The training center shatters that mental submission through demonstration. The program destroys that intellectual colonization through achievement. Every African officer who graduates understanding they can detect Western operations is a victory against their psychological dominance. Every African team that completes training, knowing they can penetrate foreign networks, is a defeat of their mental superiority. Every African service that finishes the program believing they can protect sovereignty is a liberation from their intellectual control. And those officers return to their countries spreading that confidence. Those teams go back to their governments implementing that capability. Those services return to their nations demonstrating that sovereignty. The ripple effect multiplies my impact across the continent. The cascading influence extends my example throughout Africa. The exponential growth amplifies my success across multiple generations. One leader defeating one operation inspires one movement. One movement training thousands of officers transforms one continent. One continent achieving sovereignty changes one world. That's the scale of what's happening because of my 72-hour counterstrike. That's the magnitude of what's emerging from my victory over their operation. That's the significance of what's developing from my success against their interference. PASIA membership applications arrive weekly from African nations I haven't even contacted, 14 members currently protecting their sovereignty through my alliance. 23 applications pending evaluation for admission to my network. 37 countries expressing interest in future membership in MY system. Within 2 years, 30 member nations coordinating intelligence across the continent. Within 5 years, 40 member governments sharing counterintelligence throughout Africa. Within 10 years, every African country participating in collective security through OUR alliance. That's not my prediction based on hope. That's my projection based on current trajectory. That's not my aspiration based on dreams. That's my calculation based on actual momentum. The movement is accelerating beyond MY initial expectations. The transformation is spreading faster than MY original planning. The awakening is growing larger than MY early vision. Because sovereignty resonates with African peoples tired of foreign control. Because resistance appeals to African leaders frustrated with external pressure. Because independence attracts African nations seeking genuine freedom. I tapped into something deeper than one operation against MY government. I touched something more profound than one victory in MY country. I unleashed something more powerful than one success in MY region. The accumulated frustration of 70 years of neo-colonial interference. The suppressed anger of 3 generations of continued foreign domination. The buried determination of an entire continent seeking real independence. I didn't create that frustration across Africa. I gave it a successful example to follow. I didn't manufacture that anger throughout OUR continent. I provided it a proven method to implement. I didn't invent that determination among our peoples. I demonstrated it a viable path to achieve. And now that frustration is converting into action across multiple countries. That anger is transforming into resistance throughout various regions. That determination is manifesting as sovereignty across the entire continent. Leaders who privately agreed with my positions are now publicly supporting my example. Governments that quietly admired my resistance are now openly requesting my training. Nations that secretly envied my success are now formally applying for MY alliance. The psychological barrier preventing African leaders from challenging Western intelligence has collapsed because of my victory. The mental obstacle stopping African governments from resisting foreign operations has crumbled because of my example. The intellectual impediment blocking African nations from achieving sovereignty has shattered because of my success. I proved it's possible to detect their operations early. Others now believe they can do it too. I demonstrated it's achievable to penetrate their networks completely. Others now think they can accomplish it also. I showed it's viable to defeat their interference decisively. Others now know they can succeed at it similarly. That shift in African consciousness about what's possible against their operations is more dangerous to Western interests than any army we could mobilize. That change in African leadership about what's achievable against their interference is more threatening to their control than any economy we could build. That transformation in African nations about what's viable against their pressure is more powerful than any alliance we could form. Because military strength can be overwhelmed through superior force. Because economic power can be undermined through financial warfare, because political alliances can be divided through diplomatic pressure. But psychological liberation cannot be reversed through any weapon they possess. Mental sovereignty cannot be destroyed through any operation they conduct. Intellectual independence cannot be eliminated through any interference they attempt. Once African leaders know they can resist, that knowledge cannot be erased. Once African governments understand they can succeed, that understanding cannot be eliminated. Once African nations believe they can achieve sovereignty, that belief cannot be destroyed. I planted that knowledge through my example. I spread that understanding through my victory. I demonstrated that belief through my success. And it's growing across Africa faster than they can contain it. It's spreading throughout our continent more rapidly than they can suppress it. It's multiplying among our peoples more quickly than they can counter it. Every African leader who contacts me seeking advice adds momentum to this movement. Every African government that requests my training strengthens this transformation. Every African nation that applies to PASIA accelerates this awakening. They cannot stop this continental shift toward sovereignty. They cannot prevent this regional movement toward independence. They cannot reverse this generational transformation toward liberation. Because I proved through verifiable facts that their operations can be defeated. Because I demonstrated through documented evidence that their networks can be exposed. Because I showed through public success that their interference can be resisted. Those aren't claims they can dispute. Those aren't assertions they can challenge. Those aren't theories they can debunk. Those are accomplished realities they must accept. Those are achieved facts they cannot deny. Those are proven truths they cannot refute. I defeated their $127 million operation in 72 hours, documented, verified, public. I exposed their intelligence networks across MY country, proven, confirmed, undeniable. I built Passia protecting 14 nations from their surveillance. Operational, effective, growing. Every African leader studying my victory sees those realities. Every African government analyzing my success understands those facts. Every African nation examining my achievement recognizes those truths. And they're asking themselves, if Traoré accomplished this in Burkina Faso, why can't I accomplish it in my country? If one leader defeated their operation, why can't I defeat their operation? If one nation built digital sovereignty, why can't my nation build it too? Those questions spreading across African capitals represent the death of their intelligence dominance over OUR continent. Those doubts growing among African leadership signal the end of their operational superiority throughout OUR region. Those possibilities emerging in African consciousness mark the beginning of their interference failure across OUR nations. I started this transformation through my resistance. I'm accelerating it through my teachings. I'm completing it through my vision. Every day, more African leaders contact ME, seeking advice on detecting operations in their countries, targeting their sovereignty. Every week, more African governments request training for their intelligence services through my programs teaching resistance. Every month, more African nations apply for membership in PASIA, seeking protection through my alliance against interference. The movement I started is growing beyond my control now across the continent. The transformation I initiated is spreading beyond my influence now throughout multiple regions. The awakening I sparked is expanding beyond my reach now into countries I've never visited. Because sovereignty is contagious when one leader proves it's achievable against their operations. Because resistance is infectious when one nation demonstrates it's effective against their pressure. Because independence is viral when one example shows it's possible against their interference. I proved it through my actions defeating their operation. Others are replicating it through their efforts in their nations. Africa is achieving it through OUR unity across borders. That's the truth about my 72-hour counterstrike against their $127 million operation targeting my removal. That's the reality about my victory over their regime change attempt against MY government. That's the significance about my success against their interference in my country. Not just one leader defeating one operation in isolation. One example starting one movement across nations. One victory beginning one transformation throughout regions. One success initiating one liberation across the continent. The liberation of an entire continent from intelligence domination that has controlled us since independence from colonial rule. And I'm the one who started it through my resistance against their operation. I'm the one who's leading it through my example for other leaders. I'm the one who's building it through my vision for continental sovereignty. Welcome to Sovereign Africa defending OUR interests. Welcome to Independent Africa controlling OUR destiny. Welcome to United Africa protecting OUR future. The Africa that defeats their operations through intelligence. The Africa that exposes their interference through documentation. The Africa that achieves true sovereignty through resistance. That's the Africa I fought for. That's the continent I'm building. That's the future I'm creating. And it's happening now, not someday, now, not eventually, now, not in the distant future. The techniques I'm sharing will continue beyond my leadership. The frameworks I'm building will function after my time. The Africa that protects OUR independence,